we begin again, as always, with our extinction segment. What is that all about? Well, we suggest here, we theorize, we argue here that we are the last generations of humans on Earth. I don't know how long it'll last, maybe another 10, 20, 30 years at most. I have no idea. I can't tell you exactly when. I'm saying we're very close to the end and that there is nothing that we can do about it. Zero D, nothing. Okay? Um, what's going to happen? What's going to cause our extinction? A comet's going to hit us, climate change? No, it's the global economy. Global economy will, not may, but will collapse. There is nothing we can do about it. It's guaranteed, just like it's guaranteed that humans will not overpopulate the earth. You know, we're probably going to have another billion more people by the time extinction comes around. Maybe we'll reach, maybe, right? About 9 billion people on the planet, and that's going to be it. And that's going to be part of the reason that we stop our economic growth as well. Aside from the fact that there is a qualitative thing going on as well, which is, for 200,000 years, maybe 300,000 years, since the beginning of our species, we were, for the most part, hunter-gatherers, maybe 95% of that time. About 10, 15,000 years ago, we went into agriculture, farming. About 200 to 300 years ago, we went into manufacturing, industry. And about maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, we went into services. And there's almost no hunter-gathering today. I don't think there's any real hunter-gathering. Even the pygmies in the jungles have a cell phone today. So there's no real hunter-gathering. Farming is being done by corporations for the most part, or getting there. Eventually, if we keep on the path we're on today, it's all going to be done by corporations, big corporations, agricultural corporations. And the workers will have no other choice but to be working in either manufacturing or services. But manufacturing is dying, okay, because we're producing this more efficiently as time goes by. We try to be more efficient. Companies compete against each other, and so they put more efficient processes on the line. And that is going to push everybody into services. And services is another word for unemployment. Person who works in services is doing unemployment. He's not really working. He's not in direct contact with nature, with food. And food is all we need to live, to stay one more day alive. So here we have a situation where you have people who are working in things, in activities that are not producing food. See, in the old days, we produced food directly. The guy went there with a spear and killed an animal and lived one more day. And we're not there today anymore. Today we depend on someone else to produce the food for us. And all we're doing is passing money around, giving it to the person who produces food so that he feeds us. And when that cycle is interrupted, that's the end of all of us. And that's what I think will happen when the global economy collapses. Global, okay? Anyways, so we look at things related to extinction, some signs out there, some trends, and how they're related to extinction, okay? And here's one trend that's happening these days. It's that people are working from home. And there's one fellow says, a 50-year-old NYU professor went viral for telling young folks that they need to be out of the house for success. But his advice got blasted. By 2025, 36 million Americans may be clocking in from the comfort of their home. Okay, so people are moving into this mode in which they work from home. But then I looked it up, and here's this McKinsey report, and it says the most striking figure to emerge from this research is 58%. That's the number of Americans who reported having the opportunity to work from home at least one day a week. 35% of respondents report having an option to work from home 5 days a week, etc., etc. Point is, people want to work from home, and the problem I had with this little report was it says, in every part of the country and sector of the economy, including traditionally labeled blue-collar jobs. I had a problem with that. And I'll tell you why, because I'm saying that you cannot work from home from true, genuine blue-collar jobs, manufacturing jobs, industry jobs. Here's the, from that same article, it gives you a listing of the jobs that people are working from home lately, okay, or at least getting into that mode in which they work from home, okay. Give me a second here. Went on the other side. There we go. And if you look at these jobs, the occupations, and I'm just going to put a couple examples here. Look at the bottom. Fifth from the bottom says farming, fishing, and forestry. I'm not sure you can do a lot of farming from your house, you know, on your carpet, apartment carpet, you know. Fishing, I don't know what you can fish there. So obviously, these so-called manufacturing or industry-related jobs, they're talking about within that industry, people who work with computers. Okay, so what's increasing are the computer jobs, okay, internet stuff, and not really blue collar work. I'm not sure what blue collar works they're referring to. They didn't go into that kind of detail. They just mentioned that blue collar jobs were increasing. I'm saying that's not the case. What's increasing are services. In other words, computer work, internet stuff, maybe phone, you know, that kind of stuff. So here's the trend I've been showing for some time. Here it is one more time. Okay, you can see that we've been hunter-gatherers for most of our existence. About 10,000, maybe 15,000 years ago, we went to agriculture and farming. Manufacturing 200 to maybe 300 years ago, and about maybe 30, 40. This is an old chart, by the way. I haven't updated it, but the important thing is the trends. And you can see that maybe 30, 40 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago, we started getting more into services. And about 10 or 15 years ago, we went into a special type of service, a service within service, an industry within an industry, or a category within a category. And that is that we've gone into internet services. And that's what's increasing today. Everybody's getting into some kind of internet type of job and abandoning, you know, hands-on type of services like landscaping, barbering, that kind of stuff. That's falling behind. A lot of stuff is going to be taken over by chat GPTs, you know, and so they're probably going to take a lot of jobs in the future, and that's going to squeeze the proletariat, the person who depends on a salary, out of the job market. What are these people going to do? Well, they're going to depend on government help, and government's going to have to send them a check. And who pays for that? Well, the people who work. They take out of their paychecks and give to the people who don't work. That's the way it works today. And obviously, the more people are in the unemployment or welfare line, the fewer people that are working. You can see that that trend cannot be continued, and I think that's part of the process that's going to cause the collapse of the global economy. Okay, but there is another trend on top of that, and that is that even these technology jobs, as they're called, internet jobs, they're disappearing as well. They're kicking people out of those jobs. And here's a report that came out, a little bit of news, says Google last week announced it would lay off 12,000 people from its staff. And it's the latest big tech company. They mentioned a couple others, right? Microsoft and Amazon, Meta, etc. Says to enact mass workforce reductions in recent months. And they go over this. They say there have been more than 200,000 tech jobs lost since the start of last year. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Maybe these companies, which provide a lot of the work out there, by the way, okay, not only direct work, but also secondary work, you know, companies that service them or subcontract, etc. You know, you don't want these big corporations to come down. And again, if you introduce into these big tech corporations things that, you know, robots, I call them robots, that do the job that humans should be doing, that's even going to squeeze more people out of the market, out of the job market. So I think that's a trend that you have to be watching, you know, maybe not panicking, but certainly watching. Okay. Another trend that seems to be happening, I don't know if this is true, I mentioned this the other day, and that's the UFOs. And it says 1 in 5 professors say they had a UFO, right, encounter. Okay? And so you see some of this in the news lately. I don't know if this is a new trend. Okay, here's another piece of news. Body cam recording catches cops investigating potential UFO crash. And they immediately put these weird extraterrestrials as a picture, you know, to catch your attention. And the question is whether there's a trend now to, you know, distract people from other issues, and maybe that's why this is going on. I don't know if this is real or it's just a fad again that's beginning. So I looked at the trend. I'm saying, are there more sightings, or is this on the up and up? And this is what I found. It said reported UFO sightings by month, and then you have their by year, and you can see they're coming down. Fewer people are into it, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is no upward trend. The only upward trend is the people who see, unidentified flying objects that look like Saturn. The classical disk. Okay, people see more of those out of those people who do see UFOs, unidentified flying objects. So, is there a trend to distract people from other issues, maybe the economy, and so they put these things there, or is there a real fad going on? This is coming back into being, in the news. My take on this: we can't leave the earth, we cannot save ourselves, and neither could any other civilization that ever existed or exists out there today. In other words, if there are Klingons out there somewhere on a planet, which is very, very likely, okay, I think it's almost impossible that there isn't, okay, some other civilization out there. But for them to contact us or be here, having come down here, that's impossible. That's simply impossible under the rope model, okay? Here's why. I'm going to illustrate it for you, okay? Here's us trying to escape the Earth. We have our little rocket, okay? And we're going to try to leave the Earth and go to, I don't know, the nearest star, okay? That's assuming, we're going to assume that everything is nice and peachy over there, pristine Garden of Eden is waiting for us, so we just go there and inhabit and everything's already done for us, okay? And so let's just assume all that, and here's what would happen, okay? Here's you trying to leave the Earth, okay? Every atom in your rocket, including yourself, is bound to every atom on Earth. In other words, there's a connection there from every atom to every atom, okay? So as you try to leave the Earth, okay, it's not that you're stretching anything, okay? So don't get the wrong idea. What you're doing is sliding through existing ropes that connect the Earth, for example, to Alpha Centauri, okay? So you're going to go to this nearest star. You're going to go through these existing ropes, okay, that attach every atom in your body and every atom in your rocket to every atom on Earth and to every atom in Alpha Centauri. Okay, we're just going to use this system. And what I'm saying is, the farther away you get from Earth, okay, the more you get into what I call the linear region, the linear regime. Okay, and here it is. Here's a view of that. Here you have the Earth, the Sun, and the bird's beak, and that long region there between the two stars is the linear regime, okay? Proxima Centauri on one side, the Sun on the other. As you try to leave the solar system, you enter this region where the ropes are almost as one, they come together like a coaxial. And it's a region that has no gravity, no Newtonian gravity. Newtonian gravity only occurs in the bird's beak region. So once you get into the linear regime, you don't have anything pulling on you, okay? And what happens is like you hit more or less a region where you slow down and you have all these ropes. You're sliding through all these ropes all the way to Alpha Centauri without any pull, without any tug. There's no gravitational pull on you, okay, from either star when you get into the linear regime. So if this is the case, we're going to make that assumption, then it's impossible for any living entity to travel from star to star, interstellarly. That's our view here, okay, just so you know. And so it's important to know whether the rope model has any validity whatsoever, if that's what's out there, okay. Okay, another issue related to extinction. Here we have Saudi Arabia looks to China for business as U.S. influence wanes. And yeah, what's happening is that Saudi Arabia, also the United Arab Emirates the other day, they're all kind of ditching the United States a little bit. They're trying to maintain an even-handed position, what used to be called the third world, okay, equidistant from Russia and China on the one hand and from the United States on the other. And this is a significant change because the United States had a lot of influence over the Middle East, and I think that is dying a little bit. These countries are not willing to follow the United States anymore. They have a little bit of power now. The other day, the Saudi Arabia and Iran reached an agreement after so many years where they were enemies. They have ambassadors in each other's capitals. And they also allowed Syria, which was banned, back into the Arab Union. And so it's happening. and it doesn't favor the U.S. interests in that region of the world. And China, meanwhile, is buying a lot of oil from uh, countries like Saudi Arabia and others. And so, they're starting to have more business with China than with the U.S. And since China can sell them some technology that's being produced by their manufacturing processes, it's leaving the United States and Europe a little bit out of the deals. So that's another trend that's going on, so keep that one in mind. Okay, so the other day we talked about some other issue that's going on, and that's all this trans issue. A lot of people changing their sex. Quite scary. Can you imagine, cutting that thing there? Oh my God, I can't even imagine that. But in the old days, I had three sons, and I would tell them little bedtime stories before they go to bed. And I would tell them stories like from Aesop's Fables and Hans Christian Andersen, things of that nature. But I also pulled stories out of the Bible. Okay, and no, I did not pull stories like this one, where Potiphar's wife pleads with Joseph to sleep with her. Even though, the girl looks pretty good, so I don't know why he would reject her. I think that's more of a fairy tale, okay, if you ask me. But I mean, unless that's not what the girl looked like, maybe she was fat and ugly and had hair all over, I don't know. But no, I would tell him stories like of this caliber, Joseph being sold to Egyptians or to a caravan as a slave. He ends up in Egypt. He becomes a very important man, and then one of his prophecies comes true, and that is that his brothers and his father will one day bow down to him, and that's exactly what happens according to the Bible. Did it happen? I don't know if it did. I think it's a great bedtime stories, and you'll find lots of them in the Bible. Bible is one of my favorite books, and I'm not kidding you there. It's a good book. I read it 3 times completely from beginning to end, when I was young. And I recommend it to anyone. It's an interesting book, not so much because what it says is truth. It's to me, it's very interesting because it gives you an idea how people were thinking in those days, what was important to them. Okay, it gives you a lot of insight into that. So there's a lot of stuff I like about the Bible. Old Testament, the New Testament I don't care about. But the Old Testament I think is a pretty interesting historical book. The only part of the New Testament is how religion changed. If you look at the Old Testament compared it against the New Testament, yeah, religion did change. This God, this manly God, with 2 feet and a head and 2 arms, etc., he turns into this abstract concept. Okay? Now he becomes love. He becomes intelligence and so on, so God became an abstraction. Okay, so when you pray today, well, you're praying to an abstraction, not to the God who had a magic wand, waved it, and made the universe. That God is gone. Okay? Not too many people believe in that God today. Even I'm talking about religious people who Christians and so on. Okay, so what are the bedtime stories of today? Well, they're a little bit shocking. So right now, if you don't want to be shocked, turn your screen off, okay, for a few seconds. I'll give you 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. These are the books that you see today, okay? These are the bedtime stories. In My Daddy's Belly. So we have the 2 daddies, okay, and one of them has a baby in his tummy. Okay, so these are the bedtime stories of today. A little bit shocking. And you wouldn't have even imagined this in the 1960s or 70s. Believe me, this is completely out of anybody's guess in those days. Part of the reasons for this, you have people like the government, they're somehow spreading this from a propagandistic point of view. They're heavy on equality, and so this is something they're pushing. And I think they will win eventually because people will put equality above anything else. And so what can I tell you? The laws are going to change. There's like 500 or 600 laws right now being discussed in the United States to help these folks or hinder, because there are people on both sides of the issues, obviously. And so the question is, who's going to win? My bet is that the people who are going to win are the people who vote for equality. Anything related to equality, I think eventually is going to triumph. It's going to be victorious, successful. And that's simply the way it is because they put that above anything else. And they forget about, all the other stuff, what these people do in bed, and they don't care about all that. They say equality. We should treat everybody at the same level. And I think that's going to win in the end. Okay, so for the new generation, these are the type of women you'll find in the future. Okay, this is what they look like. Some have transitioned. Fellow on the far right over there, he's the fellow who's been criticizing my theory. I found out a short time ago that he's transitioning, okay, turning into something. I did not know about the sign that's behind him. I didn't know that that was the sign of these transitioning people. Okay, okay, and so I've talked about nouns here because that's what we need in physics. You need nouns. What are nouns? Nouns are objects. Only objects can be nouns in physics. You cannot use the word motion, for example, the word orbit as a noun in physics. Those are verbs. Okay, so we talk about nouns, but what I've left behind are the pronouns. And this is the age of pronouns. So I want to make sure that we understand that here we have object, right? And those are the things. But as you can see, I've never touched upon pronouns. Okay, so what I did, I said, I have to come up to speed with what all these people are doing out there. A lot of companies, you go to universities and so on, and they're all putting their department of diversity and inclusion and diversity, and everybody's put, it's a fad today. It's just all over the place. There's not a company, I think, that doesn't have that. Okay, so I decided to do the same thing here. Okay, so I'm going to put my department of inclusion and diversity. Okay. And there you have our 800 number. You can call it any time if you have any help, need any help, okay? And so as part of the deal, I'm going to include my own pronouns. I think I have a right to create my own pronouns, so I created the he, she, and the him, her, and the she, he, and the her, him, okay? I think I'm entitled to create any pronouns that I want, okay? I don't see why not. In fact, I took it a step further. Okay, so if you're over here and you want to use pronouns in my side, you better learn all these pronouns. We're going to include the theys and the its in there so that we're covered completely, so that nobody gets offended. Okay, we want to make sure that inclusion and diversity is alive and well. Okay, and I also, just in case, created my own beer. Okay, we're going to give that out to people for free so that they come and visit us. I think that's a good way of creating traffic. Okay, so just all these things that we're going to be implementing here, okay? And fellow said, in fact, several people had something to say about that subject. And here one fellow says, well, I don't think it is a loss of genetic diversity, because that's what I'm saying that causes the primary cause of this phenomenon is, right? Exactly, I think it can influence it. I think it's just rainbow propaganda, really. This is why this waves mainly has affected the U.S. Another fellow says, you don't think that increasing levels of atrazine, BPA, and other testosterone suppressing estrogen producing chemicals have anything to do with it? And yet another one says something parallel to that, says autism is primarily from shots that have neurotoxic aluminum and other ingredients. What can I tell these fellows? I think they're all mistaken. They're into politics, and they should do perhaps a little bit more of research. Okay, here is Calhoun's experiment, which I've shown in the past. He put 4 pairs of mice in an enclosure. He fed them all the food they wanted, all the water they wanted. They were isolated from disease. They had all the nesting material. They had no predators, etc., etc. And what happened was that eventually they became autistic and homosexual. Not all of them, but many of them. Okay, so John Calhoun, in his utopian mouse experiment, you can look it up, eventually was one of the first person to produce homosexuality in a lab, in a controlled environment. And he did it with rats, he did it with mice. He always had the same results. He did, I think, 25 at least experiments, maybe more, from 1948 to 1975. So he worked almost all his adult life on this type of project. Worked for the U.S. Army, or he was given a plot of land to do this by the U.S. Army, something like that. The Secret of Nim, you've heard that about the mice who escaped from the lab. That comes from his experiments, by the way. It's a cartoon out there. Anyways, the point is that he produced homosexuality in the lab. Okay? And these animals did not get shots and they did not get any chemicals that would raise their estrogen, lower their testosterone, any of that stuff. Okay. And here's another example, okay, and this is out there in the wild. Some people don't like it, but you got to face reality, okay. And here's lions, mountain lions, and sheep mounting sheep, okay, males with males, okay. And so the question is, did these animals receive any shots, or were they influenced by the politicians in their pride or anything like that? So you got to keep these things in mind. If in the animal world this is happening, then something else is going on. And what I'm saying is that what is going on, especially in the case of the lions, right? In the case of the lions, you have these animals. There were like 150,000 of them maybe 50 years ago. Now there's only 25,000 out there, I heard the other day. There's only 5,000 tigers. There's only, even fewer cheetahs. So all these animals have a very small pool to begin with. And then they all come from the same great granddaddies, forefathers. So they have very little genetic diversity. In fact, the cheetah, I think, is the animal, the cat, that has the least amount of genetic diversity in its species. And so what's going to come out of that? This is not an issue of giving it shots or educating them wrong. It's an issue that their starting material is pretty bad. Okay? And people say, well, they have protection. They have little protection against diseases. I don't think that's going to kill them. What's going to kill them eventually is that, you cannot have brother marrying sister when both of them have the same genetic code. That's, incest is not favored by Mother Nature. And I think that's where humans are today. We are all incesting. Okay? Whoever you marry today, if you check their genetic code, I don't care if they're black or yellow or white or brown, we're all in the same boat. There's very little genetic diversity throughout the human race. In the example that you'll look up, you can look this up. They ran a test with, chimps, and a troop of maybe 100 chimps out there in Africa have more genetic diversity within the troop than all of the entire human race. 8 billion of us. That's got to make you think. Why is that the case? In fact, no geneticist can answer that question. They are puzzled by it because they say, with 8 billion people, we should have more genetic diversity. We create mutations every day, right? And so they forget, the bottlenecks. That wipes out half the population, and whatever mutations that we created are worthless. And so we are now, for the most part, we haven't had too many bottlenecks, maybe the world wars, some disease here and there, Spanish flu, here and there, right? But in general, we've been progressing population-wise, but we come all from the same grandparents. Why do we have the same genetic code today? Why is there no genetic diversity? Because our great-grandfathers, whether they were in Japan, in Africa, or in the Americas, or in Europe, they went through the same sifting process imposed by diseases. Once you pass all these diseases, all those who died, they had no protection. Those who passed, they had protection, and they gave that protection to us. So we are as perfect as human beings as we'll ever get. Okay? Nothing can kill us as far as disease now, because we are all the same.